trauma informed today we're really going to be jumping together into building a trauma informed networks together on how we serve survivors and how we do that as a community. I'm Lauren Wilkie. I'm the executive director here at SafeLight in Henderson County, and today we have a mix of representatives from both Henderson County and from Transylvania County. They're going to be sharing together how we coordinate services and work together to support our survivors. I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to move it back to them to have some time to really in depth tell about their work. We do have today our clinical director from SafeLight joining us, Gabrielle Kalis. Welcome. We have from SAFE in Transylvania County, we have the Crisis Service Program Manager, Karen Stewart. Thank you for joining us, Karen. We have from Henderson County Sheriff Department, Sheriff Lowell Griffin. Thank you for joining us today. And we also have from Transylvania County Sheriff Department, Sergeant Mark Ellenberger joining us. And so together we're going to share with you how we coordinate and work together to really make a difference in the lives of those we're serving. I'll start with Mark. Mark, tell us a little bit for a couple minutes about the work you do and what brought you into being in the role you're in today.
Well, when I started in investigations, one of the primary roles for this position, I think it started as a grant of several years ago, and was taken over by the department for a specific domestic violence investigator. As I came into it, I was handling all the domestic violence cases that came through. There's obviously a lot of challenges with handling domestic violence and getting officers on board to get you what you want. And but you know, it's I kind of took it by the reins, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the success stories, obviously. And there's unfortunately fewer success stories, but you know, all it takes is one to keep you coming back. We're blessed over here to have a good group of people to work with and plenty of resources to send victims to. A lot of times they take us up on those resources, and a lot of times they don't. But I mean, if nothing changes, as more, let's say, repeat cases come in, nothing changes. I treat each one just the same, whether it's a repeat case or not. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for everyone in domestic violence. But I'm just kind of grateful to be here at the sheriff's office and work in this community where we have such resources and outstanding people to work with.
Thank you, Mark. We're thrilled to have you. Gabrielle, you're a licensed clinical social worker running the programs all at SafeLight. Tell us a little bit what brought you into this role.
I think, like a lot of social workers, I sometimes kind of end up getting someplace without really understanding how I got here. I've been working in the field of domestic violence for probably close to 30 years at this point. Before I came to North Carolina and came to SafeLight, I worked in Massachusetts, and I worked through a contract with the Department of Corrections, and I ran domestic violence programs inside both the minimum security, and we didn't have maximum for women in Massachusetts because we're too small. So we had max sentences, but it was a medium security facility. And I just found that I love this work. I am so excited to be working with SafeLight, where I think that what we do is special and important. What makes it special is that I think we work really hard at really serving the whole person. So we're not just going to provide, shelter. We're going to provide you job training, and we're going to provide you the opportunity to involve yourself and your children in counseling. And we're going to give you, support if you need to go to court. So we really try and look at these issues from a very broad perspective. And I think that that is something that is pretty unusual, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And Karen, I think that really nicely segues into the role SAFE does as our partner agency next door in the county over. How did you get into your role?
So I actually started working here about 4.5 years ago, and my first role was as a child advocate. And It kind of got me started in the work. I really enjoyed working with children. I worked in the schools. We do a lot of teaching here at SAFE. We do a lot of teaching in the schools. We're in pretty much every school in Transylvania County. And then working with other agencies, you know, collaboration. Mark kind of touched on the fact that in Transylvania County, there are just so many resources here and a lot of agencies that want to work collaboratively to try to serve families holistically, as Gabrielle was saying. And I think that's one of the things that we do at SAFE is really trying to help the family, you know, we have all these different services that we offer. You know, we have case management, we have counseling, we go into the schools, all these kinds of programs that we're doing. And really what we're doing is trying to work with the family. So we also have the domestic violence intervention program that works with, you know, both male and female offenders. And so, you know, if we're trying to affect change, you know, we're giving the same message to everyone in that family, you know, providing them with the same tools, providing them with the same language to really try to work on, you know, conflict resolution and how to have healthier relationships with people. So.
Thank you, Karen. And Sheriff Lowe, I know we work very well as community partners to link survivors into care. And what brought you into working with the Sheriff's Department here for Henderson County and running as sheriff? And what have you seen that's important for us to understand that you are bringing and doing for survivor services?
Well, you know, as a teenager, I was looking for my place to really fit in. And I ended up then with a volunteer fire department, one that I'm still a part of today. That's I know it's hard to believe that because, you know, I'm only in my mid-30s, but that's been 40 years ago that I joined this department. And at that time, I fell in love with the idea of serving something that's bigger than yourself. And there were many paid firefighter positions, and a lot of my friends doubled as at that time serving their communities as both firefighters and law enforcement. So I became curious, and I got into law enforcement, which where I've been for 30 years now. And over that time, I have seen tremendous changes. There's been so many changes throughout this county, throughout the city, throughout the region. And I'll tell you this: the one thing that I've learned is that no one agency can accomplish everything by themselves. These mountains are just too big for us to climb alone. But collaboratively, when I work with your organization, when we work with our other community partners, we can accomplish so much. And from my seat now as an administrator, I see the importance of that. And that's one thing that from my position, I want to make sure is that the sheriff's office is joined hand in hand with our community partners to make sure we can provide the best for the people of Henderson County. And Laura, I think that your organization does a tremendous job, and I'm proud to be here with you today.
Thank you. I can definitely mimic those same sentiments and say the same for our Sheriff's Department and our Transylvania partners as well. We couldn't do it alone. Absolutely not. It's a team effort. And for me, being in this work, it's all about working in something that you have passion for and that you care about. And that makes the work for us all the more enjoyable and being able to work together. As a mental health expert and as running an agency that does all mental health behavioral care, what the biggest thing we need people to understand is there's a buzzword called trauma-informed care that has gotten very popular in the last few years. What does that mean? So trauma-informed care means that together you're understanding how people's experiences cause them to have mental health issues, maybe depression, maybe post-traumatic stress disorder. Different things are happening based on those experiences. And we're working with survivors. We are working with people who have had some of the worst moments in their lives, and they're coming to us at their most vulnerable. And how do we respond, and how we know that those things that we say will be with them for a lifetime? How together do we partner to be trauma informed? So, Mark, when I talk about trauma informed care and how it influences what we do and what we say, what would you say is something that you make sure to keep in mind when you're meeting with survivors, and what tools do you maybe use as part of that process?
One of the most important tools that I use is I try to not necessarily put myself in their shoes, in that person's shoes, but I learned early on to understand that it's easy for young officers to start off saying, oh, if they're getting abused physically or mentally, why don't they just leave? Well, that's very easy, and that's the common myth. Early on, when I started doing domestic violence, I told myself I'm not going to think that way. So each time a case comes in, I try to say, okay, what put this person in this situation? How can we fix this situation? Because just separating them doesn't usually work. So with the resources we have available, we try, like Karen was saying earlier, with the DVIP program that's going on, and we're getting more judges ordering it. We're educating people how not to become victims. A lot of them grew up in a home where that happened, and it might be normal procedure, either as a victim or as an offender. The education process that teaching the survivors as well as the offenders, trying to correct both of them, seems to be the most effective outcome, rather than just the simple solution of, well, they just need to leave. If they're getting abused mentally or physically, then I would just leave. That's that common myth. Once I became trauma informed, it helped the day-to-day operation of working a domestic violence case. One of the challenges I have is trying to educate all the officers that work and respond to those calls at midnight or 1 a.m. to try to sit back and put themselves in that situation, like I get to put myself in when I'm sitting at the desk at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I know that's hard, but a lot of times, if they'll just ask a couple more questions, I can come in behind them and take care of the victims on the process that I have created, kind of. And it helps with their case, and not only criminally, but then we bring in all these other resources to help with the education process to hopefully prevent another incident from occurring. But as we all know, that's the challenge, and that's why we're all here.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. I know you mentioned the DVIP program, which both Gabrielle and Karen have domestic violence intervention programs that they run. Gabrielle, tell us a little bit more about what that program is and how it's trauma informed and other things that we're doing that really help work towards prevention.
So we have a couple of DVIP programs. I am a huge proponent of these programs because I think that, as Mark was saying, to piggyback on what Mark was saying, you can't just say separate, and it's so much more complex than just saying kind of stop doing this, whether you're talking to somebody who's experiencing the violence or somebody who's perpetrating the violence. I strongly believe that there isn't this, it's not this clear-cut line between being a victim, which is a word I don't like to use, and being a perpetrator. That research shows that the vast majority of people who perpetrate violence have experienced violence in their lives. And when we work with people who are identified as survivors, we're often surprised that their behavior can be unpleasant and aggressive. I don't know why we're surprised at that, because that's all they've experienced. But I think that as a society, we have kind of this mythology about the innocent victim. And I try to hold on to the idea that all of us are innocent, that nobody deserves to be raised in an environment that encourages them to be abusive, and nobody deserves to be raised in an environment that tells them that they deserve to be abused. So what our domestic violence intervention programs do is educate people who've been identified as perpetrators of violence. And we provide case management, we provide support. So again, what I think that we do well is that it's not about being punitive. It is about taking responsibility. And we expect these individuals to take responsibility, and they have to do things like they have to actually show up for group, and they have to pay for it, and they have to be responsible in those ways. And they have to acknowledge what they've done. That's a key part of our programs. But at the same time, we also want to empathize with them. We want to see these individuals as complex and interesting and challenging people versus just perpetrators or just abusers. So we're really working at kind of trying to erase, if we can, those labels and really support these people in making changes in their lives.
I like that we sort of took this twist. We often talk about all the programs we offer, and there's a plethora for survivors. This is the one that we're really, as both Karen and Gabrielle have said, is one that we're doing for prevention. And I know there's a lot of more of community education and different things going, but when the program first started back in the 70s, 80s in the communities, there was a lot of backlash to be able to offer any sort of a program for perpetrators. But again, if you don't stop the violence, it can keep cycling. So Karen, tell us some about the successes you've seen in being trauma-informed and working programs like the DVIP program.
So one thing that I always think about is the fact that, I wouldn't consider myself a behaviorist, but in a lot of ways, our behavior is affected by what we see, what we're experiencing early on as children. And so we're watching how our family members are handling conflict or not handling conflict, which is something else that I see a lot of times with survivors when they get into an abusive relationship, is that they may have been sheltered in their life. They may have, their parents may have hid from them when they did have conflict. And so they weren't equipped with those skills that they needed to navigate conflict or navigate those kinds of relationships. So I think that it's really important, psychoeducation is a lot of what we do. For myself, even with survivors, a lot of what I do is psychoeducation, helping to normalize, to understand what's going on, why is this happening? What does this pattern mean? Helping them to understand what those patterns are and where does that come from? The way that you handle conflict or your anger, where does that come from? And what were those early messages that you got, and how does that affect the relationships that you're currently having? And so part of the work is about, how can we look at those things that are no longer serving you, because they're not serving you anymore. And you want to try to create some kind of new way of handling conflict, new way of handling your anger. And so that's a lot of what, it's a lot of unpacking those early experiences, unpacking, the way they've been doing things, and then saying, hey, there's another way that you can do that. And so, we're very client focused here, very client centered as far as, trauma informed, making sure that clients have the authority, that they can make the decision, that they come in. I usually am not working with people on the front line. It's usually people who have expressed I'm ready for change. I want to do something different, and so when I'm working with them, it's okay, well then, we need to have some honesty about what it is that you're doing. How are you contributing to this situation? And so a lot of it is kind of taking their lead, following what is it that meeting them where they are, what they're capable of changing, and kind of helping them to get to where they want to be.
Thank you, Karen. When we talk about domestic violence and it being all about power and control in the work that we're doing and understanding that power and control model and being trauma informed, I'm curious, Sheriff Griffin, how a lot of this has influenced how your team interacts when they come across survivors and perpetrators.
Well, number one, the vast majority of domestic disturbances that we respond to, that we answer, are nonviolent as far as what you think of as typical violence when we're talking about physical violence. When there's physical violence there, the law doesn't give us any leeway in how we're to perform our jobs. That's one of the few statutes on the books where it says the officer shall. We don't have any choice but to make an arrest if there's evidence of physical violence. But so many times we know what's going on behind the scenes. And what I can say is, these things you're talking about emotionally charged situations, and we're there in that crisis moment. And sometimes it's a good opportunity to maybe form a relationship with the people, persons on both sides, whoever the officer perceives as the aggressor, and or the for lack of a better term, as we've said, the victim, and to convince them that this is not a healthy way of life, that there are better ways to live out there. And we've had success on both sides of being able to guide both the aggressor and the victims to help. Now, sometimes it's you're beating your head against the wall, because we respond to the same locations over and over, and we see what's happening and we see what's building, and we just can't get through. But a big part of our success is being able to hand out the material from Safe Flight, the material that gives these folks an opportunity to seek this other help that's there, because we can't solve their complete problems. We can't solve those issues in that few minutes that we're there in that crisis situation. So the best that we can do at that point is apply the law as we can, but try to get these people to understand that there's a better way of life, and that we have agencies available and people willing to help them through what they have going on, to find that better life. And that's where we try to engage them and speak with them and get them on the right track.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that really segues right into our next discussion of how are we identifying and engaging. A lot of times it's not as cut and dry as who's the perpetrator, who's the survivor. Sometimes it's blurry, and sometimes it's both, a little bit of each. So Mark, how does your team navigate that identification and linkage of services when you're coming across what are maybe one or two stories that stick out to you that aren't black and white, they're more of a gray blend?
Well, like Sheriff Griffin said, typically these calls come in and they're late at night, or there's alcohol involved, and as much as a relationship as the officers want to build, they just can't get into there to get that relationship. Typically, I'll get involved first thing the next morning after there's been an arrest or a report done. If there's a report done, then I see it when I come in the morning. One of the first things I do is grab it up, and if there's someone in jail, then I reach out to the other party immediately, and I'll start offering resources. One thing I learned real early is, they've been through some trauma and they've got a lot on their plate. And I used to say, hey, here's the number to our Family Resource Center. Give them a call. There's a ton of resources out there to help you with blah, blah, blah. Well, then I realized that they probably weren't even writing that number down. So I changed my thought process into saying, hey, I'm going to give your contact information to our Family Resource Center. They will be reaching out to you in the next 24 hours, hopefully before lunch. And 99 out of 100 times they are reach out right out to them before lunch. But that helps them with, now someone's calling me, offering me help, instead of I have to call someone for help. And those situations have become exceptionally successful due to the fact of I start explaining to them about the protective order, and well, I don't know that we have kids, he has to be able, and I'm like, well, the protective order doesn't necessarily just say no contact. I said the protective order, it offers the DVIP, offers him some education, him some treatment, use some treatment. The Family Resource Center will get in with the children, helping them with treatment. Another thing I find off right off the bat is if they have children and school age children. Lucky enough, my wife is the director over student services for Transylvania County Schools. So she works hand in hand with all the school counselors, and I have their contact and I know them well. And if we have a child that was in the household, whether they were there or not during the incident, I reach out to those counselors and I say, you don't have to bring this incident up, but check on these children for us, because it might explain some bad grades, some behavioral issues, some attendance issues. So I'll reach out to those counselors, and we've been very successful at that. And sometimes the children bring it up, but sometimes it's good to have a friendly face at the school that they a new way of meeting that person, and not necessarily having to go in and be counseled all the time. Just giving them an idea that someone out there cares for them. And I always say, you don't have to tell them that this happened last night. Just check on them and see if they'll bring it up. But referring, like I said, the resource center to them, to contact them, has been very successful, as opposed to the way I used to do it, give them a phone number and try to get them to do it.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark. I think that's a great sort of twist to sharing about how to link someone into the care. And for SAFE, that's the Family Resource Center. SAFE Like calls ours the Family Justice Center. So same, but different. Sheriff Lewis, as Mark was sharing his story, I wondered if it made you think of a story or situation that y'all encounter that's similar.
There's over my career, and unfortunately I sit here as an administrator now, so I'm running specific situations through my mind. And I can remember back when I was answering these calls or investigating this type of behavior, and we would have occasions where we would end up making dual arrests on a scene. And that's just because the law states that we have to arrest the aggressor. Well, unfortunately, we would get there and there's been a physical confrontation, and we couldn't really readily identify who the aggressor was. We just knew that the situation, if left unchecked, was going to lead to something even worse. So there are so many different stories and so many different types of situation, and each situation involves humans, and humans are inherently unique. So you can set a standard, or you can set a path to follow, and each situation is going to be just slightly different. So I think it's important, as officers respond, as investigators follow up, and I know that Mark has seen this over and over again, but we've got to be flexible in how we deal with these folks, and understand, that maybe what's causing the issues there in this home may need a different approach. You're going to be you could answer 5 domestics today, which we'll probably answer more than that in a day, but we could answer 5 domestic disturbances in a day, and all 5 of them are going to have basically a different catalyst. You could have, even though 2 of them could be substance abuse, one may be drugs, one may be alcohol. There are all sorts of mental health issues out there that have gone unchecked that leads to disturbances and violence in the homes. And that's why it's so important to be familiar with these community partners that we have, and be able to make the proper referrals And Mark Sergeant made a tremendous point in saying maybe we need to be doing more follow-up and going to these community partners and saying, look, we have a problem out here at this location, and I think you're the ones that may be able to help these people. And I think just an aggressive attitude in that can go a long way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sheriff. And I think that leads me, Gabrielle, to sort of tag team as we're linking that law enforcement first response into the longer term behavioral care and making changes. What are some of the trends and changes you're seeing happening and how we're responding to survivors? What are some new things that we have available that, as you said 30 years ago, when you started, that it's different, it's changed how we see it and how we work? What are some of those things you see, Gabrielle?
I would say, and this I think is true in the field of mental health in general, that one of the major changes that I've seen over my career is when I started, I worked in a crisis department. We were screeners for all the clients coming into a community mental health center. And if there was any suspicion that there might be any substance involvement, we immediately said, oh, we can't see you. You have to deal with your substance abuse issues first. You have to go over here and fix this first. And the reasoning was, how can you address your mental health issues if basically you're under the influence? And on some level that makes sense. The problem is that basically is you're turning people away from getting services. And we see so many people who are dealing with dual diagnosis. And to tell people, oh, you have to deal with anything first versus dealing with them at the same time is pretty unrealistic and doesn't really provide services to our clients, doesn't help the situation. So I appreciate what Lowell was saying in terms of how often substances are involved when we're dealing with domestic violence. And I think what we've gotten much better at is trying to address both of these issues at the same time, and understanding that they are intertwined and that they cannot be separated. So we have staff on our, here at SafeLight who are very familiar with working with both of those issues concurrently. And I think that that's been a huge change in the field.
And the whole time Gabrielle was talking, Karen, you were nodding enthusiastically. So it seems like you're having something similar. What are you seeing as trends?
I just appreciate exactly what Gabriella was saying. And I agree. I've seen the same thing. I mean, I haven't worked in the field maybe as long, but I've found that too. I feel like as providers, as advocates, we have to really educate ourselves at many different levels and on a lot of different topics, a lot of different subjects. We have to have a lot of tools in our toolbox so that when clients come in, we can really address those things that are kind of the pressing issues. However, we also have to realize our limitations and that, we're not necessarily qualified to handle all these different issues that may come up when we're working with clients. And so in that respect, as Mark and Lowell also kind of talked about how important it is to have these collaborative relationships, and I think more and more, and that you see it even with funding, more and more, we're having to partner with other agencies and understand what is our area of expertise, what is their area of expertise, and how can we work together to really support, that family or that survivor, whoever it is that comes in our door. So it may not be that we can do everything, but we can as a community. And that's part of that empowerment model too, is, advocating at a systemic level. So we're going out and getting on these committees and, developing these partnerships and working with other agencies to say, how can we provide holistic services? How can we understand that all of these issues are intertwined, domestic violence and substance use and mental health and homelessness and all these, big topics, and how they are intertwined with each other very closely. And so to figure out how can we, as a team really help to address all of the complex needs that our survivors are really having.
Thank you, Karen. I love that we keep highlighting that to do this work the right way, we do it as a community, and it's a community level problem that has to have a community level response with all of us. Mark earlier said in our talk, he brought up a myth and trend that we often see and we often believe, well, why won't they just leave? Why would you stay in a bad situation? And we forget, because of so many levels, that you don't have the opportunity. You may be fearful, you may be hopeless, you might be dependent on drugs or alcohol in the home, you might not have the support, you might be financially dependent on that person, you may have children you're worried you may have to leave or lose custody, you might be embarrassed or have shame. There's so many levels of different things that could be happening of why someone can't leave. Statistically, we know it would take someone 7 times to leave to be able to stay gone. And that's a very powerful, large number. And I wonder if anyone wants to touch on that and share other myths or trends that they're saying that they've had to overcome or to work with their staff and training their teams. Sheriff Griffin, you want to start us off with that one?
Well, I want to go back to one of the leading catalysts in all of our criminal activity, and it's to me it's one of the leading causes of any type of breakdown in the home, and we've touched on it already, and that's simply substance abuse. And because I have been part of another summit already this week where we've talked about some behavioral health issues, and how the needs in Western North Carolina, and I can tell you right now the needs aren't being met. But a lot of these substance abuse issues revolve around, and what we have to educate our folks, these substance abuse issues revolve around some mental health issues, and people self-medicate. And it's not just that, okay, these people like to party. It's not just that, they like to be addicted to a substance. It's many times masking a deeper issue. And so you're now faced, when you're there with dealing with a very dynamic situation where you've got a family involved, and you've got someone that's part of this, that not only has a substance abuse issue, but that substance abuse is masking a deeper issue. So this becomes, and that's the reason there again, we need all of these community partners, because us as law enforcement, we can't fix that. All we can do is try to guide them and get them to the next level to where there is help available. But there's no way we can't fix that, sitting in someone's home after a 911 call. But we see it, and realizing what's going on, at least that gives us possibly the skills we need to reach into that toolbox, as Gabriel mentioned, to reach into that toolkit and pull that right tool out, and hopefully guide these folks to the facility or to the group that'll give them the greatest chance for success.
Thank you, Sheriff. And I'll move it back to you, Mark. Sergeant, you talked about how you see the myth of people not wanting to leave because they can't leave. We talked about how often substance and mental health are a huge part of what's happening. Are there other myths that you're finding in your community to be able to serve survivors?
Well, and it kind of touches on everything that everybody said. A lot of them are dependent. I mean, there a lot of the issues we deal with, the victim and the children are in the home, and just stay-at-home mom, and totally dependent on the offender's paycheck. And the myth is, well, it's just so easy to leave. Everybody has freedom to walk out the door. And then when you say, well, no, they can't, they're dependent on this home. They don't have family around here. They can't go stay with friends. And then the other myth is, oh, well, we've got a safe house. Well, yes, we do, but it's not an unlimited bed safe house. And the goal there is quick protection and education, and hopefully get families back together. The one thing I touched on earlier with getting the school counselors involved with small children, I think, letting them know, educating children that, this isn't a healthy way to live. And because some of them might grow up in that home, and then when they get older, statistically speaking, they grow up in a domestic violent home, they become victims or offenders themselves of domestic violence. And because that might be the way that's the way they were brought up, and that might be how it's supposed to be. And touching on Sheriff Griffin's talking about the substance abuse, I would say almost every case we have, there's some sort of substance abuse. Maybe not by both, but at least one party on that call that the officers have gone to, at least one party is usually involved in some kind of substance abuse, whether it be drugs or alcohol or both.
When we talk about myths and we bring it back to the reality of domestic violence being linked into power control, Gabrielle, let's talk about how that power control really, like we said earlier, it's not always physically violent. It can be emotional. It can be cutting you off from all of your family, all of your finances. What are some things that you see that can help us understand that myth?
So again, I think, as we've all talked about, so much of this is about education, about educating ourselves, about educating our communities, about educating our clients, and recognizing that, and I think in general, we've gotten much better at this, but recognizing that domestic violence is not about anger, and it is about control. And one of the first things that we do with people who've experienced domestic violence is sit down and talk about what is domestic violence. And the definition that I like to use is an ongoing pattern of coercion within a relationship. So then we talk about, well, what are all the different ways that you can coerce somebody? So we coerce people with love. It is just as abusive for one partner to say, if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. This is something that I've heard all the time throughout my years. Like, why did you say, well, my partner said if I left, they were going to kill themselves. This is somebody that at least at one point, this person loved. And I think that sometimes our communities forget that, and they forget the power of that love. And when people talk about why do people stay in these very destructive relationships, I think people are embarrassed to say, well, I love my partner, because it feels maybe, what's wrong with them that they love somebody that's hurting them. My answer is, in relationships, those are the people that can hurt us the most. And in a healthy relationship, ideally we try to minimize that and we try not to hurt each other. In an abusive relationship, we use that ability to control each other. But I think that we need to acknowledge that emotional piece, and that to say, well, yes, there are these resources, and you know what, even if you do have family nearby, and, even if you are willing to give up everything almost that you have and come into shelter, and that includes your home, and that might include your job, and that is going to include your companion animals, and you're going to give all of this up, and again, depending on what's going on legally, that may include your children, to come into a shelter. That is just an untenable decision to make for many people. And the bravery of the people that do come into shelter is really pretty phenomenal.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I think those are all great points that we want to really make sure people understand when we talk about being trauma informed.
Hey.
And
Laura, can I add
Yes.
just something to what she had to say?
Absolutely.
One thing that I can remember encountering when I worked these cases, and this is really so tough to overcome, is when the victim, and I'll use that term again, I don't know what else to use, but when the victim feels like, or they're made to feel and actually believe that the problem is their fault. and it's going on just what Gabriella said, is there can be a time when we have an abuser, and now we're actually talking about somebody that is manipulative and abusing, probably without any type of physical harm, but they make the victim feel like everything that's wrong in that relationship is their fault. And that's really tough to overcome and lead these folks to help. But that's where the counseling is needed, in my opinion, the most. And that's one reason that they won't leave is besides the threats of suicide, which are very real. We deal with that all the time. Very good point. But these victims feel like they have done something wrong to bring that relationship to the point it is, and that just becomes it becomes really difficult, especially for law enforcement, when we're there, and for just those few moments, to get somebody to understand that it's not their fault. That's a pretty big hurdle to overcome.
Absolutely. Thank you for really highlighting that in for us. So we've really touched on a lot of that physical, that emotional. Karen, can you really highlight for us a little bit more of that financial separation that happens with that power and control? How have you seen survivors get separated from their work, their finances, the people they know, so that they just don't have any income to support them when they're wanting to leave?
So can I actually talk about something else? It just kind of piggybacks off what everybody else has been talking about. You're talking about myths. And I was thinking about one story in particular. And I do want to just have the disclaimer that as Lowell had mentioned, every situation should be treated uniquely. So there's no one size fits all, as far as decisions that need to be made, or, how we're necessarily working with people. But a couple of myths that I've noticed from survivors that come in. First of all, one is that the family absolutely has to break up, no matter what. And like I'm saying, yes, there are safety considerations. There may be violence. It may be a completely unsafe situation. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying, oh, you should stay no matter what. But there are instances where the family can be reunited, as we all know. So that's one myth. And then another myth is that with survivors, they come in and they say, well, if he would just change, everything would be fine. So let's work on his behavior. So let's change his behavior, and then my situation will change, right? And so I think part of it is, and I'm thinking of one story in particular of a young woman. She had a young family, who had come in, and the husband would just kind of throw these temper tantrums, just he wouldn't get his way, or, couldn't find something for work. I mean, poor emotional regulation, obviously couldn't calm himself down, didn't know how to take care of himself, how to soothe himself. And she started to feel like, it's my job. I have to make him feel better. Right. So, which is common. And we see that all the time with abusive situations. But, she came in like, I need you to help me figure out how to get him to stop doing this. Not understanding that she was also contributing to that, because she was focused on his behavior, what he was doing, which in turn was, kind of perpetuating things. So anyway, the work that we did, she became empowered to start focusing on her own life. So she started to focus on what is it that she wants? How does she want this relationship to be? Does she want this relationship? How does she want to be a parent to her children? She was employed, so she had an income. So, but still, she had to take that into consideration. If I leave, this could affect my livelihood. I have a certain, needs that I want to provide for my children, and I want to continue this lifestyle and everything. But it was really amazing to watch as she shifted the focus away from him and the things that he was doing, how naturally some of those behaviors started to fall away, because he started to realize, okay, I can't do the things that I was doing before. She's not gonna indulge me in that way anymore. And then they were able to they actually stay together. They have a strong marriage now, but I think it's, really being honest, having to take an honest look at yourself and what is it that you're doing in that situation that is also contributing to the problem. And usually it's a dynamic, there's some kind of dynamic that's happening there. Manipulation, as Gabriella was talking about, obviously plays a lot into it. But yeah, I think that there are situations where if there's enough education, that the families can be reunited and they can have healthy relationships with each other. So I think it becomes really important as advocates in the field that we are not having agendas for our clients. We are not, when they come in, we are not telling them what they should be doing or what they shouldn't be doing or making any decisions for them, which also goes with the empowerment model, that we're really honoring where they are and what they think. I mean, they know themselves and their relationship a lot better than I do. I'm standing on the outside looking in. And so really supporting them to make that choice for themselves. And then if they say, hey, I really want to work things out. Okay, let's provide you with some tools and education and knowledge so that you can keep your family together.
Absolutely. I'll just tag on that. I was doing a training in the community recently at a church, and I had a survivor come up to me after that we had served years before. And she shared with me that she is still with her husband and that they're doing well now years and years later. And they're still continuing to work on their dynamics. And he's continuing to work on himself so that she can stay in that relationship. And so I think I'll highlight that, as Karen said, everybody's situation is different. And we do it as providers case by case to make sure we're keeping everybody safe. And I'll highlight, as I was saying, with the financial resources, very often as we go back to the perpetrator tends to use the power and control to separate you so you can't leave. And so that's financially what we see happen as a trend. And another way to keep that power. Gabrielle, I see that you're wanting to say something. Go ahead.
So when we talk about the isolation and the financial control, we have, it's generally not somebody saying, give me all your money and don't see any of your friends or family. And not that that doesn't happen, because again, anything can, but it's generally much more insidious. It's generally more, well, nobody likes to manage money. It's not a whole lot of, don't worry, honey, I'll take care of this. I'll help you with this. And, don't you want to spend time with me? Why are you going out with your friends? Don't you want to spend time with me? So it's much more insidious, the control, than just coming in and saying, you can't do this or you can't do that. And then suddenly a person finds that they have fewer connections and their family might be angry at them for not spending the time that they previously did, or their friends might be angry at them. And suddenly they don't know kind of where the money's going or how much money is coming in, and they don't have access to it. So again, I think that those are pieces that are important to understand when we think, well, how did people get into the situation? Well, somebody said, I love you and I want to take care of you. Let me take care of you. An example that kind of has always stuck out in my mind is I worked with somebody whose partner would not let her get into the car herself. He insisted that what a gentleman does is open the car door for a lady, which sounds lovely, right? Very kind of old-fashioned, romantic, whatever. But she would literally be having to be standing there in the rain or the snow or whatever because she was not allowed to open the car door. So it's kind of these very subtle things which I think are the most insidious.
And I will add, I know it gets heavy in our talks that we talk about women as the survivors, but very, very often we're serving men as well and have the same situations happen. And I just want to highlight that and say that we at Safelite are continually serving a larger and larger population of men as well.
As well as people who are non-binary
and
or identify as trans.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I want to, as our last question, really highlight gaps in the community. And Sheriff, you really started with us when you said, as we just had a behavioral health assessment with our community, we were really highlighting that number one is mental health, number two is substance. As we've really highlighted here today, those are one and the same and twisted together. Substance is behavioral health. What are some gaps? Let's dream for just our last few minutes together. What would you like to see happen in your communities? What are some things that you like to see done, and how are some of those things already happening with you and your community partners that you're excited to share with us today?
Well, I think the exciting part is we're coming together. We're looking at where these problems and these gaps are, just like we're talking about, which is what we have to do before we can start to research solutions and work towards solutions. Some of them, are problems. I think as we look at the gaps. We need some help from our state. We need some help from our legislators. There's in Western North Carolina, and I can tell you, especially, and I'm going to focus on the mental health care. In Western North Carolina, there are a lot of resources available if somebody has an adequate insurance plan. Most folks that are suffering from some sort of mental health issue may not have access to good health care, which is going to preclude them from a lot of private hospitals. So we have a very limited area where there is inpatient treatment that's accessible for these folks. And I can tell you right now, as the sheriff's office has the sole responsibility of transporting some of these folks to find the appropriate mental health care assistance that they're sometimes court ordered to get. We're having to transport folks who are already suffering from some sort of trauma, and we may have to transport them 7 or 8 hours across the state to an open bed. So there are a lot of issues where our mental health care system in North Carolina is still broken. We still need help. And that's like we talked about, that leads to further drug abuse, alcoholism, because of people self-medicating. And I still think that that's something that our society has to tackle and realize needs to be a priority.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you highlighted that. And I think we could talk about this question a lot longer. I see we're running out of time. There are a lot of gaps that we're still working towards. I know at Safe Flight, we have another facility that we're building and expanding to fill some gaps, but there will consistently be the need for us to meet together and work to do things. As amazing as we already are from where we've been, we still have some miles to go. And I'm excited to say we're all working together on that. If I can kind of close us out with just a few things to remind the team, thank you all for participating today. This has been an amazing panel and discussion. It will be shared. So if you have anyone you share that wants to watch it to later can do so and have access. There will be a link that you'll be getting by email and in the chat box that if you follow that will take you to a brief survey that when you fill that out, you will be getting a certificate for a continuing education hour from being part of this panel. And I'll remind you that we do have 2 more panels that are coming up soon, and those links are being shared in the chat. And those next 2 panels are for free CLE hours for our lawyers who need those hours. And so it'll be a training that will offer that. If you have any other comments or questions, we're putting Rebecca, our outreach manager, her email will be in the chat box and you can follow up with her. But I just want to close out and say how grateful I am to work and know all of you and the work we're doing together and making so much lives and the survivors that we're serving. And I appreciate all of you for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
hosting.
you.
Lauren.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lauren.
I will say to y'all, I wish we'd had a little bit more time together in that last question. It's such a good one. And I know everyone had things they wanted to share, even myself, but I knew, oh, we just ran on it. But it's just such great work. You all are just amazing.